I was coming home from work one evening, and it was just an ordinary day. I work a 9 to 5 office job, so I left work at my usual time. It was around 5:15 p.m. when I got in my car and started to drive back. My commute is pretty standard, about a 30-minute drive along some busy roads and highways. As I was driving, I hit a little bit of traffic, as usual, nothing out of the ordinary. About halfway through my drive, I started feeling this weird sensation, almost like deja vu, but stronger. It was like I had done this exact drive at this exact moment before. I remember glancing at the clock and seeing it was 5:45 p.m. The strange feeling didn't go away, and in fact, it started to get stronger. I tried shaking it off, thinking maybe I was just tired or stressed out. But then, things really started to get bizarre. The traffic around me began to thin out way quicker than it should have. And before I knew it, I was the only car on the road. That never happens around that time of day. I decided to take a slight detour through a side street, hoping to avoid a possible accident or something that had caused the sudden drop in traffic. As I turned onto the side street, it felt like everything around me shifted. The light, the air, the sounds, they all changed. It was subtle but noticeable. When I got back on the main road, I glanced at the clock again, fully expecting it to be around 6 p.m, given the detour and light traffic. But the clock read 5:30 p.m. I was sure it was 5:45 p.m. when I first looked at it, and I'd been driving for a while since then. I chalked it up to my clock being messed up and continued driving. But when I pulled into my driveway, it was 5:45 p.m. again. Now I was really freaked out. I checked my watch, my phone, and even the clock inside my house. They all confirmed it was indeed 5:45 p.m. I tried to rationalize it, thinking maybe I misread the time earlier or something like that, but it didn't add up. I remember seeing the clock at 5:45 p.m. when I was still halfway home in heavy traffic, yet somehow I managed to complete the rest of my drive, including a detour, and still arrive home at that exact same time. I told my wife about it, and she laughed it off, saying I probably just misread the time, even joking that I was never good at reading the time in the first place. But I know what I saw. The weird deja vu feeling, the sudden absence of traffic, the time on my clock. It all felt too real to just be a mistake. Since then, I haven't experienced anything like it, but every time I drive that route home, I get a little on edge, half expecting something similar to happen again. I've read about time slips and glitches, and this feels like one of them, but I still can't wrap my head around it. This started about 2 years ago. I was driving home from work one evening when I felt a sudden wave of dizziness. It only lasted a moment, but when it passed, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the world seemed slightly different. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe I was just tired. When I got home, I noticed a few small changes. My kitchen table had a different tablecloth, a pattern I didn't recall buying. My cat, Henry, who normally greeted me at the door, didn't come running. Instead, he was calmly sitting on the couch, giving me a look like he didn't recognize me. I told myself I was imagining things, but over the next few weeks, more little differences kept cropping up. My favorite coffee shop had a new menu item I was sure wasn't there before. My next door neighbor, whom I'd known for years, introduced himself to me like we'd never met. I began to suspect that something was seriously wrong, but I didn't want to sound crazy, so I kept it to myself. Then it happened again. I was at the grocery store when I felt that wave of dizziness, and the world seemed to shimmer around me. I steadied myself against a shelf, and when the feeling passed, I noticed everything looked slightly different once more. The layout of the store had changed. An aisle that previously had snacks on it now had cleaning supplies. Panicked, I rushed home. This time, it was more than just small changes. My car, which had a dent from a fender bender months ago, was suddenly in pristine condition. My apartment had a different couch, and some of my clothes were missing, replaced by others I didn't recognize. To top it all off, my bank account showed transactions I hadn't made. I started keeping a journal of all the changes. Every time I felt that dizziness and the world shifted, I'd note down the differences. It happened several more times over the following months. Sometimes the changes were minor, like a new brand of toothpaste in my bathroom. Other times, they were more significant, like coworkers having different roles or even different names. The worst part is, I'm no longer certain if the world I'm in now is my original one. The differences are all subtle but definite. My best friend suddenly had a sibling that they never had before. My favorite restaurant closed down, even though I distinctly remember dining there just a week ago in another version of my life. The feeling of disorientation is constant. I've tried talking to people about it, but they either don't believe me or think I'm losing my mind. I can't blame them. If someone told me this, I'd probably think the same. I've stopped trying to figure out why this is happening because it's driving me insane. Instead, I'm just trying to adapt to each new shift as best I can. But it's been exhausting, always looking for the next subtle difference, wondering if today is the day I shift again and what new changes will come with it. I really have no idea how to cope with this. I've been debating whether to post this for a while because it sounds completely insane. But after reading and listening to glitch stories, I figured it was time to share. This happened to me last year, and I still can't make sense of it. I'm an amateur photographer, and I love taking pictures of nature. There's a state park about an hour's drive from where I live, and I often go there on weekends to relax and snap some shots. This particular weekend was no different. I packed my camera gear and headed out early in the morning. The drive was uneventful, and I arrived at the park just as the sun was starting to rise. The light was perfect, casting a beautiful golden glow over everything. I found a trail that I hadn't explored much before and decided to follow it to see what new perspectives it might offer. About an hour into my hike, I found this amazing spot. A small clearing with a picturesque view of the forest and a distant lake. I spent a good amount of time there, taking what felt like some of the best photos I'd ever captured. I was really excited about how they were turning out. After a couple of hours, I decided to head back. I was eager to get home and upload the photos to my computer to see them on a bigger scale. When I got home, I immediately connected my camera to my laptop and started the upload process. That's when things started getting weird. As the photos were uploading, I noticed something strange. Mixed in with the new photos were some old ones. Photos I knew I had deleted months ago. They were from an entirely different trip I took to the same park in the winter. I was sure I cleared my memory card before heading out, as I always do to avoid running out of space. Baffled, I checked the timestamps on the photos. The new ones were correctly dated as from that morning, but the old ones had timestamps from only just recently. It didn't make any sense. I thought maybe there was some glitch with the memory card, so I formatted it again and set it aside. The next weekend I went out to the park again. Different trail this time, different setup. I took a bunch of new photos, confident I had fixed whatever the issue was. But when I got home and uploaded them, the same thing happened. Mixed in with the new photos were more from that winter trip, ones I was certain I deleted. This went on for weeks. Every time I uploaded new photos, the old ones would reappear, even after switching to a different memory card. The mysteriously reappearing photos persisted. I couldn't figure out what was going on. I even took my camera to a professional to see if there was some technical issue, but they found nothing wrong with it. It was driving me crazy. Why were these photos haunting my new ones? To add to the mystery, I noticed that the old photos were slightly different each time they reappeared. Small details would change. A tree that wasn't there before, a different arrangement of clouds, a shift in the light. It was as if they were snapshots from slightly alternate versions of my past visits. I finally decided to stop going to that park for a while. I've taken pictures in other locations and thankfully, the glitch hasn't followed me there. But I can't shake the feeling that something was off. Like a ripple in time or a parallel reality bleeding into mine. I've stopped trying to figure it out and just chalk it up to a glitch in the Matrix. But I'm curious, are there any other photographers out there who have had things like this happen to them? If so, let me know. So I've been sitting on this for a while, but I feel like I need to share it. It's been bugging me for years now. Maybe someone listening has experienced something similar or can offer some kind of explanation. Here goes nothing. This happened 6 years ago, when I was around 30. I was on a cross-country road trip to visit my family. I've made this trip quite a few times, usually powering through the 15-hour drive in one go. This time, I left at 3:30 p.m, a little later than I would have liked to, but I planned to get to my parents' place around 6:30 to 7 a.m. My dad's retired now and an early riser, so I knew he'd be up, and I planned to sleep until lunchtime when I got there. Everything was going smoothly until around the 6-hour mark. It was about 9:30 p.m. when I felt my eyes getting heavy. I started slipping into microsleeps, those brief moments where you literally nod off for a second with your eyes wide open, only to be startled awake suddenly. It was scary. I decided after this happened 2 or 3 times that it would be safer to find a place to stay for the night. So I aimed for the next town which I could see on the horizon. I've driven this route many times, but I've never really noticed this town before. I figured it must be one of those blink and you miss it type places. When I pulled in, the town seemed almost deserted. It was late, sure, but it felt eerie. Nearly all the businesses were closed, and I didn't see a single person around. I managed to find a motel and went inside. The staff greeted me, but they seemed kind of off, distant and not very welcoming. The room they gave me was even weirder. Some of the amenities looked more decorative than functional. There were no power sockets to charge my phone, and the TV wouldn't turn on. I couldn't even find a switch. The bed was hard and uncomfortable, like whoever designed it had never slept on a bed before. Feeling uneasy but exhausted, I decided to sleep. I figured my mind must just be overtired and I'd work it all out in the morning. During the night, I woke up a few times because of strange, unsettling sounds. Kind of like metallic groans and other noises I couldn't quite place. The creepiest thing about them was I couldn't really work out what they were or where they could be possibly coming from. I'd never heard anything like them before in my life. It was creepy, but due to my exhaustion, I eventually drifted back to sleep. In the morning, I went to check out, but the reception area was empty. It looked like it hadn't been occupied for a while. No one was around, so after waiting for a while, I just left the keys on the desk and headed out. As I drove through the town, it struck me how abandoned everything looked. There were no signs for the streets or businesses, and most places looked like they'd been empty for years. I thought I saw people out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned to look, there was no one there. I even thought I saw a car driving in a distant street, only to find nothing when I turned to look. I eventually reached my parents' house and told them about my strange experience. They looked at me like I was crazy and said there was never any town where I described. That really freaked me out. On my way back, I set out to find the town again. I wanted to take photos and prove to them and myself that I wasn't going nuts. But when I got to the place where the town should have been, there was nothing there. Just a long abandoned building and a field on the outskirts of where I remembered the town being. I stopped at a gas station in the next town, refueled and asked the attendant about the town. They said there was no town in that area, nor had there ever been one. I don't know what happened that night. It felt real. It was real. But according to everyone else, it wasn't. Has anyone else experienced something like this? Was it a glitch in reality or something? Or did I slip into a parallel universe or something like that? I just can't shake this. This happened about a year ago, and it's something I still have trouble wrapping my head around. Here's my experience with what I can only describe as a parallel universe. My name is Alex, and I work as an IT specialist in a mid-sized company. Life was pretty routine. Wake up, go to work, come home, sleep, repeat. It was a comfortable, if somewhat monotonous existence. That is, until one peculiar Saturday morning. I woke up on my bed, but something felt off right away. The light streaming through the window seemed different, almost warmer and softer. I brushed it off as my imagination and went about my morning routine. When I walked into the kitchen, I was immediately struck by something odd. There was a blue mug sitting on the counter. I know it doesn't sound like much, but I'd never owned a blue mug in my life. All my mugs were white. I distinctly remember this because I like the uniformity. A little confused, I picked up the mug and chalked it up to a lapse in memory. Maybe I bought it on a whim and forgot about it, or maybe it was a gift from a long time ago. But things gradually got stranger. As I started making breakfast, I noticed more inconsistencies. The fridge had brands of food that I never bought. And when I checked my phone, it showed 3 unread messages from a person named Mark, who I didn't know. Trying not to freak out, I decided I must have been dreaming. But everything felt so real. The textures, the smells, the sounds. It was too vivid for a dream. I sat down and browsed through my phone. And the more I looked, the more unsettling it got. My social media accounts had photos with friends I didn't recognize. There were pictures of me at events I'd never been to, with people I'd never met. I started to panic and decided to call my best friend, Sarah. But when I went through my contacts, her number wasn't there. Instead, I found another Sarah with a different last name. Desperate, I called her, and to my relief, she answered. "Hey Alex, what's up?" she said, sounding cheerful. "Sarah, something really weird is going on. Do you know who I am?" She laughed. "Of course I know who you are. We went to college together. Are you okay?" It was then I realized I had slipped into some version of my life that felt both familiar and foreign. I tried to explain to Sarah that things felt wrong, but she kept reassuring me that everything was normal. After hanging up, I decided to explore more of this version of my world. I went outside, and everything looked almost the same, but there were subtle differences. Neighbors I'd never seen before greeted me warmly. The cars parked on the streets were models that didn't exist in my regular world. Even the street names had slight variations. This bizarre experience continued for the entire day. I tried to go about my life as normally as possible, but there was always an underlying current of wrongness. Eventually, exhausted and overwhelmed, I went to bed, hoping it would all make sense in the morning. When I woke up the next day, everything was back to normal. The unfamiliar blue mug was gone, the fridge had my usual brands, and my phone was full of messages and contacts I recognized. I called Sarah, my real best friend, and she greeted me just like she always did. There was no mention of our strange conversation from the day before. I tried to brush it off as a vivid dream, but I knew deep down it wasn't. It was too real, too coherent, to be a simple figment of my imagination. Even now I wonder if I somehow slipped into a parallel universe for that day. If anyone has experienced anything like this, please let me know. It would be comforting to know that I'm not alone in this. So this happened back when the lockdowns were in place. It was a weird and somewhat unsettling couple of months, and the memories of which still play on my mind, and I'm hoping someone can help me make sense of it. I live alone in a small apartment. I work from home as a freelance writer. Given my health conditions, I'm considered high risk, so I've been extra cautious during the lockdowns, avoiding any physical contact and barely letting anyone into my home. It all started when I discovered a small key on my kitchen counter. It was the type of key you'd use for a suitcase. Tiny, with a black rectangular plastic head. I immediately recognized it as similar to the key from my childhood, one my parents would use on their suitcase when we went on trips. But I hadn't owned anything like that ever. Confused, I tried to think about how it could have gotten there. I live alone and haven't had any visitors for the longest time. I brushed it off at first, thinking maybe it fell out of an old box or something. I set it aside, planning to figure it out later. Over the next few days, the key started moving. It was subtle at first. I'd leave it on the kitchen counter at night and find it on the coffee table the next morning. I figured I must have moved it and forgotten. But then, it started appearing in more improbable places. One night I left it on my desk in my home office, only to find it in the bathroom the next morning. I began documenting its movements. I would take pictures of the key's location before I went to bed and check its position in the morning. Without fail, it was always in a different spot. The movements weren't limited to small distances anymore. The key could be in one room the night before and in another the next morning. I thought maybe I was sleepwalking, but that didn't fit. I've never had a history of sleepwalking, and nothing else in my apartment was disturbed, just the key. Then one day, the key was just gone. I clearly recalled leaving it on my kitchen bench. I even documented it. I tore my apartment apart looking for it, but I couldn't find it anywhere. For a week, it was as if the key never existed. On the 8th day, I woke to the surprise that the key had reappeared, exactly where it had first appeared, on the kitchen counter. As I moved in to get a closer look, I came to the realization that it wasn't actually the key that was there. It was a stain in the exact same shape as the key. Dark, kind of like a shadow. I scrubbed at it, but no amount of cleaning would make it disappear. But the key itself never came back. Finally, after attempting numerous times with numerous different chemicals and substances, I gave up trying to clean away the stain. Finally, it just suddenly disappeared. For good, or so I thought. It's been years since I last saw the key, or the shadowy stain. I haven't told anyone about it because I can't bear the thought of people thinking I'm losing my mind. Thanks for listening. Back in junior year of high school, when I was 16, my family and I were moving to a new apartment. Near the end of the day, me, my dad, and a family friend, who I didn't really know then and haven't talked to since, were walking from the apartment to the elevator so we could go to the car and grab the last things from it. When my dad stepped into the elevator, the door closed almost immediately. It was specifically weird because the door had only been open for a couple of seconds, and it closed way faster than I've seen an elevator door close before or since. The door won't open, so we're all confused. We're talking to Dad. He can hear us, and we can hear him. Then suddenly, mid-sentence, his voice just cuts off entirely, and the door opens, and the elevator is just empty. So me and the family friend just sort of stare for a second. I step in and look around. No sign of Dad. I step back out of the elevator, and immediately the doors close again, and then reopen, and Dad's just standing in the middle of the elevator, looking dumbfounded. So we ask him what happened. He explains, from his perspective, that after the elevator door closed, at one point he stopped hearing us and the elevator went up. Then, it just stopped, and he heard what seemed to be wild animals he couldn't quite identify, and the sound of scratching on the door. This felt like it lasted around 5 minutes to him, before suddenly the elevator door opened, without the elevator ever feeling like it went back down. We lived there for over a year. We never did figure out what happened, and the elevator never did that again. My daughter got a book for Christmas. It's this really sweet little book that plays the tune of Row, Row, Row Your Boat, and each page has some artwork on it. The first page has 4 ducks floating down the same stream, 3 yellow ducklings, and 1 brown duck. The ducks are all facing the same way. Now, this is important. My daughter is 1, so right now she loves counting and repetition. Every time we see the ducks, she points to them, and I count them out aloud. I've done this at least 100 times already. I'm not even kidding. She loves this book and won't leave it alone. My husband has also read it to her loads, and he saw what she was pointing at. And he saw that she was pointing at the ducks, so he started counting aloud too. I was reading it to her this morning. It's a very short book, only like 8 pages, and my husband was watching. Everything was normal, until my daughter flipped to the first page again with the ducks, and my husband and I at the same time went, "What the hell?" The duck at the back of the line is facing the other way. I shit you not. I've looked at these ducks so many times over the last few days. I've counted them out God knows how many times, and they were all facing the same way. I would literally bet my life on it. I thought at first I could maybe explain it as overtired parent gets it wrong, though honestly, I know this book like the back of my hand, so it seems like a massive stretch. But it's also the fact that my husband noticed at the exact same time as me and was weirded out too. We both looked at each other and back at the duck, and we're both in agreement that it's changed. I've read things on this sub before and have always been like, oh cool, I wish something like this would happen to me. But now that it has, I feel nervous and also a bit crazy. I'm so glad my husband is in the same position as me though. It confirms that I'm not going mad. I have an 18-month-old baby girl, and part of our routine is every Monday we walk from our flat to a park and back, via a different route through another park because she likes to look at the cherry blossoms. We've done this every single Monday for about 13 months now. I never change the route, and it's roughly the same time every week. We took off, got to the first park, and all was okay. But for some strange reason, I felt like I was in a panic. My heart rate was high. I felt a bit anxious. I didn't really want to stay, but my daughter was having a good time. Eventually, I worked out that there was no one else in this park, just us. And it's usually quite full, so I thought that must be it. We started our walk home, where we changed the route to walk through the second park, which has the cherry blossoms. I know this route like the back of my hand. We crossed at a set of lights, and then take the first right, and up the hill to the park. Not a complicated route. I was walking with my head down, and suddenly realized I have no idea where I am. I've never seen this road before. I've lived in this city for 16 years. It felt completely off. No cars, no leaves. Every road here is covered in them, and conkers. No wind. It was deadly silent. I went to stop and walk back the way I came, presuming somehow I'd managed to screw up the route. Suddenly a car drives past with a woman in a brown jacket and hat and a pair of black sunglasses. I think, well, I'll just keep going. We'll end up at the park somehow. Then another red car, same woman, with the same jacket, hat and glasses, but the car is slightly different. I think that's a bit bizarre. Then it happens again. Red car, woman in a brown jacket with a hat and glasses. I pick up the pace and go down a different street, but something felt really bad about going that way. So I kept going straight, and after about 20 minutes of walking, I get to the end, and I'm on the road that takes me to the park I was aiming at. But suddenly, all noises, leaves, and cars are back. I go to the park and check my phone, and it's 2 p.m. I left the first park at 10:45 a.m. It takes 25 minutes to get from that park to the second one. I couldn't have been walking for more than 20 minutes down that street. The following day, I woke up early for work and I couldn't stop thinking about the road. So I left earlier in my car, and I couldn't find it anywhere. I tried 2 different ways, where I entered and where I exited, and the routes I ended up on were not that road I walked down. I just can't work it out. I couldn't sleep for 2 days thinking about it, and now I can't stop seeing the face of the woman in the brown jacket. But I don't remember ever actually acknowledging what she looked like at the time. Let me start by saying this will be long. My heart is already beating fast telling this story. Only those closest to me know that this happened, until now. When I was 25 years old, I was driving home from work one night. I lived in Los Angeles at the time. I was driving on Sunset Boulevard, heading west towards my apartment in Brentwood. For those that are not familiar with the area, there is an expanse of sunset near UCLA that is very curvy. It is 2 lanes on either side with no shoulder. It was 8:30 on a Saturday night, so there was some traffic. I was driving along, and all of a sudden about 50 feet in front of me, I saw a car, but I was looking at the passenger door. A car had spun out of control, and it was perpendicular in my lane. I didn't have time to stop. I looked to my right and saw there was a car next to me, so I had nowhere to go. I instinctively turned my car all the way to the right anyway. Once I'd cleared the first car, I spun it all the way to the left, still trying to avoid the second car. While all this was happening, I remembered a time with my mum at Disneyland when I was 3. This is not a memory I've ever had. I vaguely remember parts of that trip, but this memory was not one of them. I realized then that my life was flashing before me, and I was going to die. I had never been so sure of anything. Every part of me knew I was about to die. I started screaming. To this day, I don't know if I vocalized anything or it was all in my head. I yelled, No, this isn't fair. I'm not done yet. All the while, swerving all over Sunset Boulevard. I suddenly stopped my car and was now perpendicular in the opposing lane of traffic. I looked around and there was not a single car anywhere. It was like everything had been wiped clean. I put my car in reverse and proceeded home. I did not see a single car the rest of my way. I was only 5 minutes away from home at that point, but Sunset Boulevard on a Saturday night was completely empty. I got to my apartment and parked on the street. I didn't see one person. While walking to my apartment, I came to the conclusion that I had died, and because I said no, I was stuck in some limbo. I had never wanted my roommate to be home so badly. Unfortunately, she wasn't. I called one of my best friends and said, I need to ask you some questions. Please just answer me and I will explain after. I asked her my name, my age, what city we lived in, and the date. Obviously, she was very alarmed. I explained that I thought I was dead, and I wasn't sure I was really on the phone with her. She tried to convince me that I was alive and that everything was okay. There was no way mathematically to escape it. There was nowhere for the car on the right to go. This moment has haunted me my whole life. There have been times when I have questioned my existence. I have wondered if my life since has been a very detailed death trip, and I'm actually lying on Sunset Boulevard, bleeding out. After many years of meditation, spiritual practice, and belief in quantum physics, I wonder what life I jumped into. This happened to me in December 1969. I am a retired RN. I've experienced or witnessed many things that are beyond understanding, but I am also a critical thinker, and my story changed my thoughts on our limited view of reality forever. I was with my high school boyfriend on a typical Friday date night in Jeffersonville, Indiana. After socializing with friends at the local hangouts, we would ride out on the rural back roads that were located between downtown and my home in a subdivision. There were dairy farms and cornfields on either side of the road for about 6 miles. The few homes along this stretch sat on the back of properties, and there were a couple of equipment paths that led to small open fields that were our teenagers' parking spots. Past that, the 2-lane narrow road was heavily wooded, with no homes or cleared property for 10 miles. This particular road had many curves and hills, which is typical for southern Indiana. Sparse population and teenage driving led to many accidents. There were no cell phones in those days, and SOP if one saw an accident was to stop, help, and pray for another motorist to appear, to flag down descent to the nearest house, to call the police and ambulance, or transport the victims to the hospital yourself. It was a very cold December night, and snow flurries began. We left our parking area immediately as my curfew wasn't to be missed. The remainder of our drive to my home was through the wooded area, and on straightaways, we saw taillights quite a bit ahead. As we were approaching the second sharp curve, we saw headlights shining from ground level and at an angle towards us. We immediately slowed and pulled as far off-road as possible. The grille was damaged and the passenger side had struck trees. The headlights, in the otherwise pitch-black night, were blinding. A fully restored, beautiful 1956 Chevy had apparently tried to take the curve too fast and had lost control. The car was off the road on its roof. My boyfriend, Greg, grabbed his flashlight, got another for me, along with a first aid kit from the trunk, and we ran to assist anyone that might be injured. The headlights had kept us from seeing how many passengers the car held. I clearly remembered my heart pounding from the adrenaline and my mind fearing injuries as nobody was shouting back to our calling out and nobody was attempting to get out of the car. I could smell the strong odor of gasoline and burnt rubber. The engine was running and making a knocking sound. Greg got down on his knees and opened the driver's side door, and I opened the back. The car was empty. He reached up and turned the ignition. The engine was now off, and the woods were silent. Nothing was making sense. Our headlights and flashlights were giving us light, and we started searching for a possible injured person. The windows were rolled up and starting to fog. Greg had already searched the interior. At this point, our assumption was that the driver must have gotten out and we just hadn't seen him or her. We didn't understand why they hadn't answered us as we ran to help, or why the car had been left running. We continued to search for a person around the wreck. We tried to go into the woods, but the underbrush and steep embankment was impossible to climb. At this point, we decided whoever was driving may have just walked away. We got back to Greg's car and drove slowly 3 miles back, then turned around and drove slowly the next 6, fully expecting to find someone needing a ride home or to a phone. We were relieved that the driver must not be hurt, but couldn't imagine why they didn't see us and how they had left on foot without us seeing them. No other vehicles had come down the road. At this point, the remaining road we drove was covered with snow, and we saw no tracks. There were no houses. We went to my house where my parents were waiting as I was really late. Greg told my father what had happened and then described the car and how beautifully restored it was in case he knew to whom it belonged. The whole incident just left us baffled. By the next day, we decided that maybe there was a house in the woods or side road that we missed. We both were just unsettled by it. We didn't know why we were worried about what now appeared to be a non-event. The next day we went back to the scene of the accident. Both of us felt that we would find a house close by that had gone unnoticed, or a side road or something. We didn't understand why we were still dwelling on it, but little did we know that quite the opposite was what we found. The car was still there, but had been moved into a clearing in the trees. I will never understand what happened the night of the Chevy, whose taillights we followed, hit that curve and rolled. There it was, still on its roof. The damaged grille and front fender damage. The accident on Friday night. Here we stood on Sunday afternoon at the car. The paint was faded, body was completely rusted through over the majority of it. Tires were completely rotted and rims were rusted. The interior was dry rotted and covered with mold. The windows were gone and the windshield was broken with a baseball-sized hole full of vines growing into and out of the car. The embankment we had tried to search was now a clearing, and setting further back into the woods was a small abandoned 2-room shack. We later did a property search, but it only led us to owners that had bought acreage with a shack and a car on it. All we were left with was a lifetime of questions surrounding a cold December night. It has been years now, but that night still haunts me. I have never openly shared this story, aside from telling a couple of people that I'm closest to. Even they do not believe me. Not that they would ever say so, but when you really know someone, they don't have to. I will synopsize by saying that I believe that for a mere 1 to 2 minutes, when I was in junior high school, I had some sort of time slip, or involuntary spontaneous warp into an alternate reality. The only difference between this one here and now that I was able to ascertain from such a brief trip was that in the timeline in which I found myself, I had never moved back to the southern US where I was born, and instead stayed in the Midwest in Wichita, Kansas, where my family had moved for a little over a year's time when I was aged 11. When I was in 5th grade, my mother and stepfather separated. My mother, sister, and 2 girl cousins that lived with us at that time packed up and moved from the Bible Belt to Wichita. My older brother, who is a good bit older than I am, had met a woman online who lived there and married her, so he urged us to come to the Midwest where he had found happiness. So we did. I actually really loved it there, but just as I had started to find my stride and feel like I belonged, after about a year exactly, my mother had decided to move back to our original tiny southern town. She was having a hard time with her mental health and had reconciled with my stepfather. So I reluctantly said goodbye to the city life I'd grown to love and my new friends, and picked up right where I left off with my lifelong friends at the school I'd attended most of my life in my hometown. Looking back, I can see that as a defining moment to how the rest of my life was to go. If I had stayed there, I'd be a different person right now, without a doubt. But at that moment, I was still just a kid, so I didn't really get too meta about it. I was sad to say bye, but happy I didn't have to completely start over in an unfamiliar place. Now for my time slip, warp, or whatever you want to call it. About a year exactly from the time we returned to our hometown, I was in the 7th grade. A day like any other. It was lunchtime and I stood in line with my peers, just chatting and waiting for the line to move up to get some chocolate milk from the cafeteria. I remember vividly the boy I'd had a crush on my whole life was standing behind me, which was different, but not in a bad way. And we were maybe flirting, or I hoped we were. He made some playful comment to the effect of, "You're not in Kansas anymore, Dorothy," which was a line that people thought pretty clever to say for several years after I moved back from Kansas. But I smiled like it was new, cause crush. I had my back to the cafeteria wall, and I was leaned back, propping on it, just waiting for this line to move. I had this wave of what felt like vertigo, like I was off balance and about to topple, but I wasn't at all. My ears began to ring loudly, and my vision almost slowly faded into black. Like when you stand up too fast and your vision blacks out, but more slowly than that. My head was swimming for a moment. Then, it was foggy. When the fog lifted, my vision faded back in from the blackness. My ears were still ringing somewhat, but that too was fading out and tapering off. I remember confusion and just generally not understanding what I was seeing. I was still in school, and I was still standing in the cafeteria with my back leaned against the wall. But I wasn't in my hometown any longer. I was in Kansas again. Next to me, and obviously having been laughing and talking with me, were 2 girls that I remembered from my time there. They were older than I'd last seen them though, like I was also. These girls were classmates and friendly acquaintances. They had liked my accent and loved teaching me curse words in Spanish. But when I had lived in Kansas, they were not close friends at all. However, now they were. I don't know how I knew that, but I did. These were my best friends in this reality, the reality or timeline in which we had never returned to the South or left the Midwest. I registered first the fact that I was here, in this school and city, because we had not moved back to my home state and town. And as soon as I did, it was just accepted as fact. Like, oh yeah, that's right. And it was as if everything since we had left, all the last year of events, were undone and gone from memory. Then I was observing my friends, and my friendship and how it grew with these girls was coming back to me. Not each piece at a time, but like abstract knowledge, downloading in my subconscious in large chunks of data. Because I was so discombobulated, I can't put an exact time that my consciousness slipped into this other me's reality, but I believe it was only a couple of minutes, a few minutes at best. I had not spoken a word because my brain was running processing software with all its computing power. I did not get to the caught up mentally place of verbal speech before the ringing in my ears and dizzy head swimming confusion set back in. Only this time, not slowly but crazy fast. I literally felt like I snapped back into this new me's current reality like a rubber band. It was like the universe had noticed its mistake and snapped me back, correcting its error as quickly as possible. I think the correction put me back at the same moment in time I was at before the slip, because no time seemed to have gone by for anyone else. I looked around and said, "Am I back here with y'all now?" to my crush, to which he just looked at me like I wasn't making sense and said that the line was moving, and that was that. Anyone experienced anything like this or comparable? This happened last week, and it still creeps me out. I was walking home from work around 5 p.m. It was early fall, so the sun was beginning to set. The fading light of dusk revealed an unusual occurrence that immediately captured my attention. I thought I was imagining it at first, or there was something I didn't understand. The shadows were behaving oddly, totally against their normal behavior. Usually as the sun sets, shadows lengthen and deepen. You know, they get longer and darker. But on this day, something was strange. I stood there, not quite understanding what I was seeing, or if I was seeing the right thing at all. I observed the gradual vanishing act of something so fundamental to how we see the world. It felt like the very nature of reality was shifting, a strange departure from what we're used to. The shadows were shortening and seeming to retract into the objects that were casting them. A sense of fear crept over me as the shadows vanished, transforming the world into a bizarre and weightless-looking state. Everything seemed suspended in an unusual twilight, devoid of its usual darkness. This was really too much for my mind to handle at the time. When dusk should have gradually embraced us with darkness, it was instead a realm of eerie, unnatural glow, a world without shadows. It was like this for a few minutes, maybe 5 at the most. Then suddenly, it snapped back, and the shadows came back to how they should be at that time of day, dark and long. I was thoroughly freaked out by this, and I hurried home, not really knowing what was happening. I never witnessed anything like this again, but I'll never forget it. I never really believed in the supernatural or uncanny. The world was concrete, rational and understandable. That was until I started having what I believed to be glitches of my own. It began subtly, imperceptible blips in reality. Shadows danced out of sync, colors melded in impossible ways. It was as if the very fabric of my perception was warping. It all started one evening, walking down a familiar street. The buildings seemed to ripple, momentarily melting into a surreal montage of distorted geometry. This may seem a bit fanciful, but there's really no better way to explain it. My breath caught in my throat as I struggled to grasp what I was seeing. What the hell was this? Was it a trick of my mind? Had I eaten something that had given me a weird effect? Hours turned into days, and similar things kept happening. I'd hear echoes of conversations that never happened, see faces in crowds that shouldn't exist. It seemed as though reality was morphing, leaving me stranded in a strange world. It was both terrifying and mesmerizing in its own way. As what I call glitches started to intensify, I began questioning my own sanity. Was this the onset of mental illness? Was I starting to lose my mind? Doubt gnawed at me. One night, in the midst of a particularly severe glitch, I gathered the courage to reach out and touch the distortion. My fingers met an electric, vibrating sensation. It sent shivers down my spine, confirming the reality of the glitch. I was no longer a passive observer. I was an unwitting participant in this reality-altering spectacle. I woke up the next morning, and the glitches had stopped. Everything had shifted back into reality. This took me by surprise as my perception had grown accustomed to the distortions in reality. I really have no idea what I experienced for that week. I've considered asking a doctor, but I'm a little afraid of what I might hear. It all seems to have passed now. So what happened in that 1 week? My mind felt lucid throughout the whole time, so I don't think I was losing my mind or anything like that. I also don't feel it was the onset of mental illness, as I seem totally fine now. But does anyone have any idea what this could have been? It makes me question what I perceive every day. One foggy morning, I decided to take a stroll in the nearby park. The air was thick with mist, lending an eerie quality to the surroundings. It was almost surreal. As I walked along the familiar path, I noticed something peculiar. The park was devoid of sound. The chirping birds, rustling leaves, and distant traffic, everything had fallen silent. I paused, expecting the sounds to return, but the silence persisted. It was an unsettling stillness, like a vacuum that seemed to engulf the world. I could hear my own breath, my own footsteps, but the park felt like a desolate, forgotten realm. I quickened my pace, desperate to escape the unnerving silence. I tried to call out, but my voice seemed to vanish into the void. I started to panic as I reached the park's entrance. Once I got past the gate, the sounds of the world returned. It was like I had just stepped out of a bubble. I haven't been back to that park since. I don't know what that was, but I don't want to experience it again. Was this a glitch? This happened back when I was in high school, but still bothers me to this day. It was late spring. The weather was finally starting to warm after a long winter, but there was still a slight chill in the breeze. I had just gotten home from school. I stood before my bedroom door, about to open it, but something felt off. The doorknob felt cold, unusually cold. I turned it and pushed the door open slowly, only to be met with a room that was not my bedroom. It was a bedroom, but totally not mine. There were bunk beds and posters of bands I didn't like. It was tidy, but had a totally unfamiliar smell to it. I stumbled back in disbelief, heart pounding. My bedroom had vanished. Was I in the wrong house? My chest tightened. I started hyperventilating, and I felt like I was about to have what I now know as a panic attack. I slammed the door shut, hoping to erase the surreal sight. When I gathered courage to open the door again, my bedroom had returned, as if nothing had happened. My bed, my desk, everything was back in place. It was as if the room had shifted into another dimension, an unsettling glimpse into an alternate reality. I spent days contemplating the incident, unable to shake off the feeling of what is real and what isn't. Some of you may say it was my imagination, or that I was just overexhausted, but the details I remember are so vivid, even down to the smell. I even remember that although the room was clean and tidy, there was one dirty white sock peeking out from under the bed. It never did, but what if it happened again? What if it was a sign of a fragile boundary between our world and something beyond our comprehension? I still hesitate before opening closed doors. This happened a couple of weeks ago. It was a rainy day. I was off from work and just sitting at home, looking out the window. I noticed a raindrop on my window pane that refused to move. While all the other drops slid down the glass, this particular droplet remained fixed, defying gravity. I thought it was odd, or that maybe I was imagining things, but it persisted. Day after day, that single raindrop stayed in place, unaffected by wind or time. The longer I observed it, the more weird I felt about it. As the days turned into weeks, that raindrop remained. I checked it every day, and then one day, it was just gone. This may not be that interesting to some people, but to me, it was just a reminder that even the smallest deviation from the ordinary could change how we perceive it. This happened a couple of years back. It's been rolling around in my head ever since, so I thought I'd finally write it down and see what other people think about it. It was just a normal Tuesday evening. It was still light out as it was late summer. I was walking back home after a long day at work. The city was quiet, the streets dimly lit. As I approached an intersection, I saw a figure standing under a flickering streetlight. The person seemed oddly still, almost frozen. Instinctively, I slowed my pace. As I drew closer, something felt off. The person was frozen, mid-stride, with an expression of worry etched across their face. It was as if time had paused for them, but everything around them remained in motion. Cars passed by, their headlights illuminating the person's unmoving form. Yet, they remained still, caught in time. I shook my head, attributing it to exhaustion or a trick of the dim lighting. Maybe stress was playing tricks on my mind. I decided to quicken my pace, eager to get home and shake off this feeling of unease. A few blocks away, I noticed another peculiarity. A group of pigeons was suspended in the air, feathers ruffled mid-flight, but motionless. Even the leaves on the trees nearby were suspended, defying gravity in an eerie stillness. Panic began to creep in as I realized this was no ordinary occurrence. I approached a nearby cafe, hoping to find some semblance of normalcy inside. The moment I pushed the door, it creaked open, but something seemed amiss. For the most part, things were normal. Customers were chatting, the waitstaff were doing their jobs. Yet, one or two customers seemed frozen, their faces fixed in various expressions, like they were paused in a photograph. Also, I noticed a coffee cup falling mid-descent, remained suspended, defying gravity. A sense of dread washed over me. Was this a dream? A hallucination? A psychotic break? I stumbled back into the deserted street, desperate for answers. The city had turned into something unrecognizable. Half of the living beings and moving objects were frozen, trapped in a silent limbo, whilst the other half kept moving as if nothing had happened. I felt like an intruder in a world that was not mine. In an attempt to find some answers, I reached a nearby park. There, under a solitary streetlight, I saw a cat mid-leap, its eyes wide in surprise. Parts of the world had frozen the moment before, yet I remained uninfected. I felt a chilling isolation, the solitude of being one of the few entities awake in a world on pause. As I walked down the eerily still park, I noticed a man sitting on a bench, unmoving. His face was etched with sadness, as if the world had ceased just when his tears were about to fall. I wanted to reach out, to understand, but I couldn't. It was as if invisible walls kept me from touching or interacting with the frozen reality. The evening seemed endless, the minutes crawling by in agonizing silence. What if I remained in this reality forever? What if I was stuck in this half-frozen world, an eternal spectator in a half-halted universe? In a desperate attempt to escape this nightmare, I retraced my steps back to the intersection where it all began. The person under the flickering streetlight remained unchanged. The seconds ticked by, but they were oblivious to the passage of time. I stood there, contemplating my fate, when suddenly, with a faint crackling sound, reality shivered. Time unfroze. The person at the intersection moved. The pigeons resumed their flight, and the leaves rustled in the wind. Life as I knew it returned to motion. Relief washed over me, but the memory of that half-frozen world haunted my thoughts. Was this a true glitch in the Matrix? A hiccup in the fabric of reality? I couldn't fathom the implications. As I continued my walk home, the echo of that frozen moment lingered, a lingering shiver down my spine. Have any of you ever experienced anything like this? Or did I just lose my mind for a period of time there? Okay, so something happened to me recently that makes me question my own sanity. Let me know what you think. It was an ordinary day. I was walking through the streets in the city, and I noticed something peculiar about the people around me. Their faces seemed to be in a state of constant fluctuation, as if shifting through an endless stream of expressions. I would see a smile, but then, in the blink of an eye, it would morph into a frown, then freeze into an unreadable mask. I rolled my eyes, thinking it was fatigue playing tricks on my vision. But the shifting faces persisted, not just on one person, on all of them. I saw it in strangers on the subway, colleagues at work, even my friends and family. Each face a swirling amalgamation of emotions, never settling on one. It was the most unsettling thing I've ever seen. I got home that day, a nervous wreck. There was just something so weird about seeing this on everyone's faces. I decided to call in sick the next day from work, not really wanting any more social interactions for a little bit. All I could think about was the shifting expressions on everyone's faces. I couldn't really afford to take any more time off work, so the day after I went back to work, everyone's faces were back to normal. I don't know what happened that day, but it haunts my dreams. I'll just say, I don't take drugs, and I have no mental illness in my family. One evening, I noticed a subtle hum, a low-frequency sound that seemed to resonate throughout my apartment. I checked on my devices, thinking it might be an electronic malfunction, but everything was turned off. Yet, the hum persisted, a steady vibration that I could feel more than hear. Days went by, and the hum continued, a constant presence in the background of my life. It was an unsettling monotony, a mundane disturbance that grew more eerie with time. It made me question the silence, the supposed absence of sound. How many subtle vibrations and hums do we overlook in our daily lives? The hum became a haunting reminder that reality, even in its most mundane form, can harbor peculiarities that defy explanation. It blended into the tapestry of my existence, a quiet glitch, a whisper in the vastness of the ordinary. This happened a couple of years back. I don't know, maybe you'll find it interesting. It was a regular day. I was working in the office, but suddenly, my computer started acting up. The screen showed strange symbols and lines that made no sense. The mouse seemed to move on its own, defying my commands. Thinking it might be a small issue, I restarted the computer. But even after rebooting, the strange symbols persisted. My phone then joined in, flickering and showing weird notifications from apps I didn't remember having. I couldn't make sense of what was happening. It was like my devices were speaking a different language. Had I been hacked? If so, why was it on both devices? Neither shared a password. I reached out to some tech-savvy friends, hoping for an explanation. We looked into it, but the more we dug, the more mysterious it became. They said I hadn't been hacked, but somehow, a hidden glitch had emerged after a recent update, creating this confusing digital puzzle. As we struggled to understand, one thing became clear. It was a peculiar situation, unlike any tech issue we had ever encountered before. We all decided to call it a day and check back tomorrow. My tech-savvy friend said he was going to look into it more on the internet. The next day, upon booting up the computer, everything was as normal. My phone was as normal too. Any evidence that anything strange had ever happened was totally gone. It was like nothing had happened at all. I called my friend up to ask him about it, and he had no recollection of what I was talking about, and said he had spent the night with his family and had not come over to see my computer at all. He wondered if I had mixed him up with another friend, but he was the one I spoke to. What happened with my electronic devices? Am I losing my mind? Every afternoon, I'd head to the park for some quiet time on the same bench under an old oak tree. It was my spot where I'd read and unwind after a busy day. But something strange began happening. Wherever I went, that same bench would appear. Different cities, different countries. It was always there. And before you ask, I knew it was the same bench because it had certain details, such as initials carved into the seat and paint chipping in the same manner. It puzzled me. Was it some kind of weird coincidence? Or a strange mistake in how things worked? As years passed and my work took me to various places, I'd stumble upon the bench in unexpected corners of the world. It was ordinary, but eerie. a seat that seemed to follow me around. It made me wonder about life's oddities, but mostly, it made me question my own sanity. I'll add here that I don't take recreational drugs. I rarely drink, and there is no mental illness in my family that I know of. I'd find it in Central Park, amidst New York skyscrapers. A reassuring presence in the midst of the bustling city. Then when I traveled to Paris on my honeymoon, it was there, in one of the many parks. I even found it in Japan, where I traveled with my husband. We were there visiting a friend, and he took us to a local park to view the cherry blossoms, which was traditional for this time of year. It was there, in that park, the same bench. I ran to it to make sure, and sure enough, all the markings were there. Each encounter with the bench gave me a weird feeling in my stomach, like a cold kind of feeling. Why was I being followed by a bench? I never went looking for it, but the bench would be there when I woke up in a new place. It was like a silent, mysterious companion. Was it a hidden message? Eventually, I stopped seeing the bench everywhere, and I can't help but miss my benchy friend. For the last week and a half, I've been noticing little things happening, but now it is starting to get to me. It started with watching videos or TV. I will be watching, no buffering, and high Wi-Fi points, etc. Then, whatever has been said on whatever I'm watching will repeat itself with no issue, and then carry on. For example, I was watching a video and the girl on the video said, "I don't know what is going on, but I don't like it." She took a breath and then said the exact same thing again, word for word, exactly as she just did. When this first happened, I thought nothing of it, but then it started happening on my phone too. I started rewinding videos or restarting movies to see if it was uploaded that way accidentally, but they were all normal. I tried to brush it off, but a couple of days ago, it started happening while talking to people. I would be talking to someone, then they would repeat what they just said exactly the same as if they didn't just say it. At first, I could try and logic my way out of this weird occurrence happening while watching YouTube or Netflix, etc. But now, I don't know how to logic my way out of people speaking to me face to face. When I ask them why they said it again, they are adamant that they did not. I've asked the people I live with if they have been experiencing this, but no one has. I started mouthing the end of sentences when it happens, but they look at me as if I'm batshit crazy. But to me, they literally just said and did the exact same thing, only moments before. No idea what is going on.
This happened about 3 weeks ago. I had the day off work, and my cousin Harold asked if I could drive him to pick up new tires for his truck. They were being sold in a town just over an hour away, and basically, it was a 2-lane country highway, straight shot all the way there. About halfway there, he points and says, "Hey, look at that house over there. It has vultures all over it. I've never seen that before." Sure enough, on the left side of the road was an old 2-story country farmhouse with 7 to 8 vultures sitting on the roof. There was another 3 or 4 circling the property overhead. Immediately, I blurted out that maybe they smelled something dead inside, and we just stared as we drove by. Anyway, we get his tires and it slipped from our mind. On the way back, we had the windows on the truck down, when suddenly we got a good whiff of rotting flesh, and sure enough, we were passing by that house again but we didn't stop and went home. I couldn't stop thinking about it, and I called Harold to tell him so. He said that he couldn't even sleep as it was bugging him too. I proposed that the right thing to do was to go back to the house, get the address, and call it to the police for a welfare check. What if someone was dead inside? What if they had family? He agrees, and we immediately set off. As the title suggests, we couldn't locate the house. We drove all the way to that town where we got the tires, then turned around, and we couldn't find it on the way back either. It was like the house ceased to exist. There was no house, no vultures, a smell of death that matched what we saw the previous day. We even went out and did the same thing the next day with no luck. But now, the more I think of it, what we saw made no sense. Although it was a country highway, there still had to be thousands of cars and trucks on it every day, not to mention police patrols. Surely, one of those would surely have noticed a creepy old farmhouse with a shit ton of vultures on it and put two and two together. I still can't explain it, and it still bothers both me and my cousin.
I live in very rural southern Appalachia, and yesterday I was going over to the next county to look at a lawnmower. It's an area I'm very familiar with, although I haven't been to the area in over a year. While on the way, I came upon a town that has never been there before. Now, there is a small community there, and it was by the same name, but this was a full-fledged small town. Had a couple of red lights, a main street with probably 15 to 20 storefronts, everything. I was so taken aback I stopped in the middle of the road. After a few moments, a car behind me honked the horn, so I pulled into a parallel spot and got out. Now, the small towns in my area are all the same. Tiny, dingy, run down. Had a heyday in the 50s and 60s, but all have fallen into disrepair. Not this one. Everything was pristine and new looking. Swept sidewalks, shiny windows, and clean brick. The people I saw were dressed in modern clothes and had the same appearance that most people in the area have. Healthy but weather-beaten and aged beyond their years. The vehicles I saw were fairly modern, new to 20 years old, nothing out of the ordinary. I walked into the little restaurant, Cream of the Crop Cafe, and it looked like every other little restaurant in the area. Booths and tables, a bar top with a register, and the kitchen behind it. Some cheesy James Dean and Marilyn Monroe pictures on the wall. I walked up to the girl at the counter and asked her where I was. She seemed puzzled, because I could tell she knew I was local by my attire and my accent. But she said, Minneapolis. I said, so this is Minneapolis. When did they build all this? Again, she looked puzzled and said, I don't know, the 1800s sometime? I couldn't handle anymore, so I just left, got in my truck, and went on to look at the lawnmower. On my way back through, about an hour later, there was Minneapolis, like it should be. A couple of houses and an old general store. No town, no red lights, no cafe, no sidewalks. It freaked me out, something awful. I've never experienced such as this, as I'm pretty mundane and boring. It wasn't a hallucination, I don't think. Everything else was the same. It wasn't a dream, so I don't know. So, 3 years ago in 2019, my husband and I were talking about the Mandela effect while we were at a kids' museum. There was a Berenstein Bears exhibit, along with probably 100 Berenstein Bears picture books. displayed on the wall and a large banner with Berenstain Bears titled across it. Berenstain being Berenstein. I remember it being really crazy for us to see that spelling of the show because we both grew up watching the show and it was always spelled Berenstain Bears. Berenstein. So later that evening, we also had a conversation about it because I was heavy researching the Mandela effect and the Berenstain Bears. And on top of that, I remember just feeling really off and weird about the spelling. Like I knew it was Berenstain. I don't know how to explain the feeling, but the spelling felt wrong. So anyway, fast forward to now, and my life is so completely different. I have a son, a career, my family members have evolved, and a lot of my perspectives have completely changed. I just figured that time does that sometimes. But now I'm pretty sure I've changed realities, and I'm back to my original timeline or a similar timeline to the one I originate from. Here's why. I was at that same kids' museum today with my son. I heard a woman talking to her son, and she mentioned the exhibit to her kid. But what caught my attention was how she said the name of it. She pronounced Berenstain, and initially, I was like, okay, wow, that's weird of her to say it like that. Like, even in the intro song, I remember it being pronounced Berenstain. So at that point, I just wanted to check for myself. Well, I was actually frozen in shock and almost worried that I was actually dreaming, because it was spelled the initial way I remember it as a child, Berenstain Bears. And I flashed back to the memory of the conversation with my husband. I know it was spelled differently that day because we were talking specifically about the spelling. I don't know if any of this is making any sense. Hopefully you are able to follow along. So then I start Googling everything about the show. And it's been spelled Berenstain all along, with the A. So I believe I was originally in this reality/timeline and then somehow shifted to the one where it's spelled Berenstain, and then shifted back to this one. But now I'm questioning everything I know and everything I see. Literally, I can't stop thinking about everything that could be different or changed, and where the me that was in this reality went to. Not to mention what happened to the reality or timeline that I just came from. I feel like I don't belong here. Like I replaced the person who belongs here. I can't explain it, but I'm so freaked out and confused. Has anyone else had any experiences like this?
When I was in 10th grade, my classmate Julia asked me to accompany her to meet her friend in a different class. The class was quite far, and after a while, we returned to our class. Since the hallway was so crowded, I walked behind Julia and was about a meter apart. I saw Julia enter the class, and when I was about to enter the class, suddenly, I was already sitting in my chair with Sarah. I don't remember how I made my way to my seat, but I was suddenly eating chips with Sarah. I saw Julia enter the classroom, and Julia screamed when she saw me. She was very pale and kept saying that I should be behind her. But suddenly, another memory entered my head. I walked out of class with Sarah and bought some chips in the cafeteria when the bell rang. We went back to the classroom and ate some chips together. Before I could say anything, Sarah told Julia that she had been with me the whole time. Because Julia was a bit hysterical, some students tried to calm her down, but they all said that I had indeed returned to class a few minutes ago. I didn't say anything about me actually remembering that we went to another class together, because I didn't want to be thought of as crazy, and I didn't know about the glitch's existence at that time. Julia's friends in another class didn't see me because I didn't enter the class, and I just played on the phone in front of the door. But she remembers Julia telling her that I accompanied her there. None of the other students saw me going with Julia during that time. Julia and everyone thought that this was a ghost story, and Julia got a lot of amulets from the temple that day. I don't know what happened that day, but I certainly can't tell Julia that I actually went with her. Everyone, what do you think really happened?
This is one of the biggest personal glitches I've ever had. I work in the admitting department of my local hospital and also help the business office with miscellaneous billing duties. One of the things I do is keep track of obituaries. When someone's obituary appears in the newspaper, I check it to see if they still owe the hospital money. If they do, I clip the obit, fill out a form, and then keep track of how their insurance pays and whatnot. A few years ago, I've worked there 20 plus years. One of my co-workers in the dietary department retired and passed away soon after. I know because I processed her obituary. This co-worker's daughter was really good friends with my cousin, so the daughter was even over at my cousin's house the day after my co-worker's funeral. They had a big wake for her mother and everything. Today as I'm working ER registration, the daughter comes in and says her mum is in the ER. I was brought up short. I thought, what? I didn't say anything for a moment, so my office mate had to step in for me and look up this lady's mother. Sure as shit, it's the woman who died years ago. My office mate lets the daughter back into the ER to see her mum, and I am unable to find the obituary form I filled out. Edit 1. I heard back from my cousin, and he's as weirded out as I am. Co-worker's daughter has no memory of the wake or anything, but she said she's been getting this stuff from the people around her for the past few days. People remember her mum dying, even funeral details and the like, but co-worker's daughter doesn't remember any of it. Plus, her mum is right there. It's freaky. Edit 2. Spoke with my cousin instead of texting him. Co-worker's daughter said it was her dad that died and not her mum. But she also said that it's not the way any of the people who run into her remember it. They're asking where her dad is, how he is today. He's not answering his phone or texts, etc. And to her, the man has been dead for over 10 years. Edit 3. I've been asked if I had any close calls or moments where I could have slipped from one universe to another. And yes, there was one. It was a little over 2 years ago. I was getting my evening medications together, but I was tired and screwed them up. I ended up taking an entire full bottle of glipizide, which is a medication that lowers your blood sugar. I accidentally took enough to kill a horse. I realized it right as I laid down for a nap due to the extreme exhaustion, and I felt really weird going to sleep. Looking back on it, I think I fell asleep forever there and woke up here. Edit 4. While the vast majority of you all have been lovely, I've been getting some really angry replies and private messages about what happened with the glipizide. I'll post here what happened to me with the medication, and I don't know what more I can add. This is how the incident occurred. If you don't believe me, that's fine, but take your vitriol and anger somewhere else, please. Here's what happened. I take a lot of meds for a lot of stuff, epilepsy, diabetes, etc. So I have a lot of empty pill bottles lying around. That day, I had an empty pill bottle with the label still on it. So I figured I'd just grab all of my evening medication doses out of my bedroom, take them to the dining room, and just swallow them with dinner. I've done it loads of times before. Like I said, I was tired that night. So when I pulled out my bottle of glipizide, I got my dose and then accidentally closed the bottle with my evening meds in it, put it back where the bottle of glipizide went, and then took the full bottle of glipizide with me to the dining room. I wasn't paying attention. I didn't look at the bottle when I took my meds that evening. I just threw the pills back and swallowed them with dinner. The pills were tiny, and all I noticed was that they didn't feel quite right in my mouth. Because the idea of taking a whole bottle of pills seemed ludicrous to me. What kind of idiot would do something like that? Well, me apparently. When I stumbled back into my bedroom, I checked the bottles because something was very, very wrong. I discovered the rest of what should have been my evening meds in the bottle I had mistakenly put in the glipizide place. That's when I saw I had downed a full bottle of glipizide. I wanted to grab my husband, holler, shout, do anything, but my body was made of lead. I could only crawl over to my bed and flop on it. And when I woke up, everything was fine. That's what I mean by going to sleep there and waking up here. I don't think I woke up there. I think I died there and woke up here.
My fiancé and I live in a small 3-bedroom apartment with my sister and our dog Champ. Our floor plan has our living room and bathroom on opposite sides of the apartment, with our kitchen right in the middle. Anyway, this happened a few weeks again during that super bad heat wave, and our AC had just broke. My sister wasn't home and my fiancé and I were eating some ice cream in the kitchen, just trying to beat the heat. Now, Champ has had this weird habit lately of hanging out in the bathroom and peeing in our bathtub. I assumed it was to cool off on the cold bathroom tiles, and I didn't think much of it because I'd rather him pee in the tub than on our furniture. My fiancé, however, does not like the idea of Champ peeing in our tub. She thinks it's gross. Well, anyway, we were eating our ice cream, and we had heard what sounded like paws walking around in our bathtub. For the record, there is nothing in our bathroom, or our apartment for that matter, that would be able to reproduce the sound of a dog's little paws scratching around in a bathtub. Well, my fiancé yells out for Champ to get out of the bathtub, but there's no Champ to be found. My fiancé gives me that do something look, so I yell out Champ's name. And all of a sudden, we hear the sound of Champ's collar rattling around and the pitter-patter of his feet coming towards us as he emerges from the living room. My fiancé and I stare at each other in a Nosferatu from SpongeBob moment. So, who was in the bathroom? We both walk over to inspect the bathroom, and there's nothing in there. What we heard was unmistakable. I mean, we both heard it, and there wasn't any type of background noise or music or TV playing in the background that we could have mistaken for it. Our walls aren't paper thin, so it couldn't have come from our neighbors. We don't have rodents or pests, and the only thing that I can think of is maybe it could have been a mouse or something. But even that doesn't make any sense. There are no signs of mice droppings anywhere in our house. And what would even be the odds of a single mouse coming and going? Plus, no way a mouse or even a rat would be heavy enough to make such a loud noise in the tub.
I hope I don't sound crazy and someone can help me here. It was a late night. I don't remember the exact day, but it was around October of last year. I was in my girlfriend's basement. We were just winding down from a party. We had smoked a bit of weed from a joint, but I swear, I did not take that much, like maybe one hit of a joint at most. And we had just gotten into bed. The last thing I remember is me closing my eyes. I woke up and I was on a surgery table. I heard surgeons talking about the tools they were using and every detail of the operation they were talking about. cutting into the back of my head and my upper spine. I heard them talking clearly and felt the pain of every single cut they performed. I heard them talking about how I was waking up and I was in shock. I couldn't understand what was happening and what was going on. I tried to stop it and wake up. I remember fading in and out of reality. I would wake up to see my girlfriend and her friends looking at me in shock like I was dying. I could see them crying and a look of concern on their faces. They were on their phones with their significant others, trying to ask for help and whether to call the police or not. I woke up again and my girlfriend had a look on her face that I will never forget. I was looking at extreme sadness. It looked like she had seen me die and was holding on to me as if she was saying her final goodbye. I was now in even more shock. It was becoming concerning. I would drift in and out of this state and back into my surgery and back into reality where the people closest to me were trying to wake me up out of this. I would feel the real pain of getting cut open and the pain of seeing everyone concerned for me. It was a lot to comprehend at once. It got worse before it got better too. It was at the point where what my friends were saying would be different from what I heard. I would hear one of them say, "I need 20 milligrams of something." Like they were nurses and they were talking like they were surgeons at a hospital. It was scary to me to hear that. I would look at them weird, and they would look back at me and laugh. Things just kept on shifting, and all of a sudden, I heard the sound of a drill and felt an extremely sharp pain in my back, and I screamed. And then I just felt nothingness and was in a daze and stared at the ceiling for a minute or two. Then I felt like I finally woke up and a wave of relief slowly came over me. I heard my girlfriend say, "I love you." I looked at her and she was crying. After that, the night proceeded as normal. Little did I know, this would not be the last time this would happen. I didn't talk about this to many people as I feared no one would believe me and just brushed it off as a nightmare while I was awake. This almost exact scenario happened once again a few months later. Only I was at a friend's house and heard these two doctors talking about their shifts and what was happening on the weekend, their plans. And I saw my friends moving in ways that, once I questioned if had actually happened, it hadn't. I again felt the pain of being opened up. I felt my shoulder and bones cracking under pressure. I felt my head being cut open. After that night, I seriously questioned if that was just a dream. I told people, and no one believed me. They thought it was a nightmare and started to question my sanity. Third time, at a restaurant almost a year later, this happened very recently. My girlfriend and I were at a restaurant and it started happening. I heard people around me talking about me and my movement and hoping I didn't touch my head. You see, in these nightmares, I would always feel like I was injured and my head or neck was opened up, and I could hear surgeons talking about how they needed to fix something and sedate me harder. It was like they were doing an annual repair on me. This time the sequence was fast and my girlfriend was crying. She told me to drink water and sit up, and when I did, I felt my back pop and bones crack, and I went away, and I returned to normal. All three of these felt far stronger than some dream. What's more, no one dreams while they're awake. These experiences were far too real to not talk about. I wouldn't hope this on my worst enemy. It has made me question everything. I strongly believe there are some forces out there that we have yet to understand. I don't know if I'm just crazy or if something sinister is happening. I have some theories. I think that we humans may be stuck in some matrix simulation. I highly doubt many people have experienced this. I just hope I'm not alone. I need answers and I never want to experience it again, as this has messed me up mentally and ruined my view on life. I believe we may be in a situation. I woke up and now got stuck deeper into it. I fought my way out all those times. Or again, I may be crazy for thinking that. Thank you for listening, and I hope to hear some theories or any input at all. Let me know. Thanks. I feel like I have changed dimensions or come to a parallel universe. 2 days ago, after having dinner and going to sleep, I wake up early morning and look outside my bedroom window. The buildings, which I could see from my room, seemed to have changed their positions, as if they got shifted from what they once used to be. And there is a subtle difference now in the surroundings. There is also a huge parabolic satellite antenna on my neighbor's rooftop, which was not there before, but it doesn't look like it has been installed new. Rather, it looks old and worn out, with pieces falling apart. I felt very light and was as if something had changed dramatically, but I had no energy to resist a change. It took me an hour to come to senses and start getting ready for work, as I could not accept the fact that something as major as this had happened. I tried checking my phone calls and emails to see if it's the same, and it looks the same. But then, I also don't have a perfect memory. What if everything is not the same, and I am not in the same world? There are subtle changes like this which have been eating me away for the last 2 days. I am also worried that if something like this has truly happened, then what about the world I was living in? What happened to me over there? If I left that place, then who is there in my place? Or have I completely left it and no longer exist? What about the people around me, my friends and family? What happened to them? Until now, I had only considered these things as fantasy and make-believe stuff shown in the movies for entertainment. But after that day, I feel different. I feel weird. My family used to contact me every day regardless of whether some event was there or not. But since the last 2 days, they have not contacted me. I messaged, and I got a small response, which was weird, considering how talkative they are. I don't think things are the same, even though they look like it. I can still see the changed position of the buildings from my window, and it looks like they have always been like this. My roommate says that I have been speaking loudly and getting up at night while sleeping, which has never happened before. Or maybe I'm tired of working so much, and it has taken a toll on me. I don't know. I just tell that to myself to convince myself that everything is fine. Thank you for listening to this. I just wanted to let it out, as there was nobody to talk about stuff like this. I have thought for the last 2 years that this event was a Mandela effect, but after finding this sub, I'm starting to think maybe it was a glitch. I'm hesitant to tell this story. No one believes it, even my husband who saw the whole thing. But here we go. My neighbors directly across the street from me. They're married and expecting a baby. The wife is a tiny blonde woman, very Caucasian, very tiny build. We wave to each other daily and yell salutations across the street. She goes into labor and they leave for the hospital. A week later, I see the car has returned, so I bake some cookies and take them over and congratulate them. Another day or 2 goes by and I see a thick, brunette lady outside with a baby, and I wave, assuming it's a relative that's come to help with the newborn. A few more days pass and I see the husband outside with the brunette and the baby. So I take the cookies over. It's her. It's the wife. Same name, same personality, and the same demeanor, except she's now a thick, kinda tall, brunette Pacific Islander. The husband doesn't acknowledge any difference. She talks to me and treats me the way she always has, but it's totally a different person. My husband noticed as well. We made some jokes about him wife swapping at the hospital, but since he can't wrap his brain around it, he starts to believe that she's always been this person, even though he clearly remembers her, teeny and blonde. I feel like everyone has lost their minds. It's been almost 2 years since that shift, and she's still a thick, tall brunette, and then I feel like maybe I've lost my mind. My only consolation is that my husband remembers it too, if only vaguely. Update 1. So I showed the picture I found of her to my husband last night. He's a little bit of a mess about it. The man is not a conspiracy guy at all, but he remembered her. He started asking some questions and tossing around ideas about what could have happened. I convinced him to go to the church this morning and attend their service. I spoke briefly with the pastor and said my neighbor had recommended that I attend. He was grateful she was sending people his way, even though, get this, she hadn't attended since she had the baby. She apparently changed churches to one a little closer when she gave birth. So, I don't know where to go next except for putting some feelers out in the neighborhood and finding an excuse to hang out with her. Update 2. I didn't want to update until I had spoken directly to my neighbor, so I endured the heat all week and spent way too much on flowers to plant in an attempt to run into my neighbors. The old lady next door doesn't remember the neighbor's wife having blonde hair, but her middle-aged daughter does. She said, "Yeah, that was a couple of years ago." I don't know why she went so dark. I thought it would wash her out. When I pointed out that it wouldn't wash her out because her complexion is tan now, she looked confused and said that maybe she had been tanning because she did look darker. I pushed it a little further and asked if she also seemed taller, but she seemed stuck on the fact that the very Caucasian blonde woman had gotten tan enough for such dark hair to look natural. She gave me several reasons, but didn't seem convinced either. I also spoke to the changed lady's next door neighbor and mentioned her having blonde hair. Neither he nor his wife remember her ever being blonde. They both agreed she had dark hair on move-in day. Yesterday I finally cornered changed neighbor lady outside. She pulled up with groceries and I offered to help carry them with her. I started talking about the church and how I had spoken with the pastor. She said some really nice stuff about the church, also that she needed a church closer. That's why she'd switched. When I pointed out that her new church was actually further away, she said she had never actually measured it, but it seemed closer. I pointed out that her old church was in our town and her new church is in the next town over, and she said the back roads must make it seem shorter. Some red flags popped up here because the back roads around here are long windy roads that circle around our town and pass by all the farmland. It doesn't ever make things quicker. It's a nicer drive, sure, but it always adds a good chunk to the drive time. Also, the new church is in the middle of the town, 2 streets over from Main Street, so if you take the back roads, you actually have to circle back to get on the main roads to get to it anyway. It would be much more convenient to take a direct route using the town roads that connect the 2 towns. It's almost a straight shot from the middle of our town to the next town over. I don't know why that bothered me, but it did. After a little while of small talk, I brought up the hair. I said that I was trying to go blonde to hide some grey that I have coming in. And did she have any tips? She laughed and said the last time she was blonde, she was in high school, and that was a mess, so she wouldn't recommend it. I pointed out that she was blonde right before having her baby, and she got really weird, almost offensive, and said she hadn't. She had only tried to go blonde that one time in high school, and it turned orange, so she dyed it back immediately. I told her I chalked it up to pregnancy brain because she was definitely blonde while she was pregnant. She ended the conversation shortly after and thanked me for my help, but you could tell she was annoyed with me. So, guys, not super sure what I learned, other than the girl next door to me, the old lady's daughter, and I are going to have another chat. She made me feel like she remembered, but she couldn't wrap her head around it. I'm going back to the church on Sunday to poke around and talk to some more people. Anyone else have something so blatant happen? Two weeks ago, my father passed away unexpectedly. I believe I have fallen into another universe since then. I meet with a close friend weekly to work on a creative project together. We meet at the same restaurant each week. Before my father died, the restaurant had a wall lined with jars of Caesar dressing and vodka sauce. I know this because I specifically examined the jars the week before my dad's death and pointed out the calorie content of the vodka sauce. In an attempt to regain some normalcy, I met with my friend the week after. The walls were now lined with Caesar dressing and tomato basil soup. This would be innocuous enough if I hadn't specifically examined the jars the week before. I spoke with the staff and they informed me they have never sold vodka sauce and have always sold the tomato soup. I feel the shock of my father's passing caused me to shift into a parallel reality. Am I crazy? Around 2003 or 2004, I worked as a projectionist in a movie theater in Middletown, Connecticut. As a projectionist, back when actual 35mm film was loaded into projectors, before theaters went all digital. Generally, after you started the last show of the evening, there wasn't very much else for you to do until the film ends. So often I'd go downstairs to help the other staff clean up, talk, eat leftover popcorn, and just generally goof off. One evening, we decided to buy a Super Bowl from one of the vending machines in the small arcade in the lobby. In case you don't know exactly what a Super Bowl is, it's a small rubbery ball, maybe about 3 centimeters in diameter. If you throw them against a wall or something, they just seem to bounce around the room forever. So, we took the ball and decided we'd try to throw it as hard as we could against the floor to see if we could make it hit the ceiling of the lobby, which was quite high. Attempting this was indeed a challenge. You had to really slam the ball against the floor to have any chance of reaching the ceiling, and we could never seem to quite hit it. Close, but not quite. But we weren't giving up so easily. We became determined to prove this was possible. Now, the floor of the lobby was a hard tile floor, so just as you'd expect, this Super Bowl would bounce off the floor and launch really high into the air. That's basic physics, right? Who would ever expect a different result? Well, on my next attempt of bouncing this ball up to the ceiling, physics apparently didn't apply. I took the ball in my hand as usual and slammed it as hard as I could against the floor, and the ball, for lack of a better explanation, stopped dead when it hit the floor. It just froze. Not even the slightest hint of a bounce. It hit the floor and seemed to stick to it, and very slowly roll away, as if all inertia and force were just sucked right out of it. This was witnessed by 3 or 4 other employees, and every one of us just kind of stared at the ball slowly rolling away in disbelief. How was this possible, we wondered? Super Bowls don't do that. We got the ball and tried again, and again and again. The ball hit the floor and flew up high in the air every time we tried bouncing it, as physics would normally dictate. Just for that one time, physics refused to work as expected. Reality seemingly glitched out for a second. This was a mystery, and we explored lots of ideas for how this could have happened. I mentioned the floor was tile, so I thought maybe the ball hit a gap in the tiles in just the right way to make this impossible throw happen. The tiles are about 30 centimeters square with a small gap of grout between them. But there's no way that the ball hitting the gap could explain it. If anything, it would have just made the ball bounce up at an angle or something. We checked the tiles. Was there anything unusual about them? Loose, maybe? No, not loose. Was there some sticky dried cola residue on them? It was a movie theater lobby after all. Nope. Tiles were clean and dry. How about the ball? Did it have some spot that was softer or something? No, that wasn't it. Even years later, when I recall the incident, I tried to think of any logical explanation that could have caused the ball's odd behavior that evening. I've never been able to come up with a reasonable explanation. Super Bowls simply don't do that. Manny, shortened from Myuu, was my first full-time dog, a rescued 2-year-old American Staffordshire Black Labrador mix that went through hell before he landed in our home. The pound staff said he came into their care with a shoelace or string around his neck so tight He could barely breathe. He was severely underweight and also had a very pronounced scar along his back that belied much more violence plagued him in his short life. What the staff deliberately failed to mention was that he had heartworm, demodectic mange, secondary bacterial dermatitis, and tertiary yeast infection on his skin and in his ears. I don't note all of this for the sake of pity porn, but to note this boy had been through a lot, and I know firsthand, when you make it past the cusp of death alive and well, you have access to certain abilities, talents if you will. I have a whole suite of stories to share about our experiences, good and bad, but for brevity's sake, I'll tell this one account, since it's the one another human and 2 other dogs witnessed. Manny was 7 or 8 at this point, and he was, for all intents and purposes, my familiar and a trusted homeboy that took damn good care of his property and would not try to escape even if the gates were open. Seriously, we once got back from a day out to find Manny sitting on the front porch with a shit-eating grin on his face, gates wide open. Any other of our dogs would have fannied off after the first cat, squirrel or noise that caught their interest. Anyway, it was a Saturday, and my partner and I were out to lunch and shopping and whatnot. I had recently purchased fresh beef bones for all 3 of ours, a dainty venison shank for my youngest 10-month-old girl, a big 8-inch beef shank for Manny, and a giant femur bone for my partner's girl / my goddaughter Rachel. Now, one of Manny's quirks was that he was profoundly orally fixated. Since he would shred and eviscerate and eat any stuffed animal we got him, beef bones became the one thing he could work with, and would generally carry one around with him most of his life. He accepts his new baby excitedly, but promptly noticed that Rachel was getting a much bigger bone than him. I saw him give her his signature frozen glare while she dug into it in her kennel, which her dad securely latched shut before we left. Manny didn't budge. Think the Rottweiler from The Omen. And I laughed at him and half-jokingly asked my partner, "Want to bet he has Rachel's bone by the time we get back?" My partner, Ben, snorted and said, "No way that thing can fit through any of the kennel gaps." I shrugged and gave Manny an encouraging pat on the head, told my girl, Rue, short for Ruxana, goodbye, and we were off. The time out was blandly pleasant, I guess, because I couldn't remember much other than wandering through a couple of stores and having lunch I paid for. We roll up the driveway, make it to the door, and hear the characteristic clicks, sniffs, and shuffles excited dogs produce when their humans return home. Always a good thing. It's when you hear dead silence that you need to worry. We enter, and sure as shit, death and taxes. There's Manny waving around Rachel's mega bone in his mouth, basically gloating and showing off to Dad. Ben just gaped, while I swooned with pride and congratulated Manny. Ben rushed over to Rachel's kennel in the bedroom, and it was as he left it, securely latched, with no obvious means of passing a giant bone like that through it. I was hugging and cackling for a good 3 minutes, with Manny soaking it up enthusiastically. No way he would give it up now, so we quietly slipped Rachel his shank, which she bitterly accepted. So what happened? We had no indoor cameras, so no one but Manny or Rachel can say for sure. And Manny departed our mortal plane in early March 2020, just before the pandemic kicked the planet in the taint. He's buried in our front yard, and I swear, he's still guarding us well. There have been times during 2020 and 2021 where I heard him growl or bark, and I'm the only one hearing it. Zero reaction from my living dogs. I would look out toward his grave and see random homeless or drug addicts trespassing up the driveway, looking for delivered packages or a place to piss or God knows what. Of course, I promptly would scream them off the property and give a silent prayer and thanks to Manny. He'll make a fine psychopomp for me when my time comes. I apologize if this doesn't make sense, but I'm freaked out and have no idea how to explain this. My co-worker and I were driving back from dinner to the place we were staying at. We had driven this route a handful of times and were very familiar with the surrounding area. It was a 7-minute drive from the restaurant to where we were staying. Okay, so we left the restaurant and had a straight drive for about 2 miles, no turns, until we had to take a right turn into the parking area of the property we were staying at. As we approached the hotel, the tall Courtyard by Marriott sign was visible, as was the building. We were a block away from the turn, and then we just suddenly weren't. We were all of a sudden driving on a highway, about to take the exit on the right. It was immediately apparent, and I said to my coworker, "Wait, something is wrong here." And he replied, "Yeah, what the hell just happened? We were just about to turn into the parking area." I told him to pull over, and I looked up on maps where we were. The map showed we were 20 minutes away, in the opposite direction we had come from. It was physically impossible, and the time on the clock was still the same as it was when we were next to the hotel. I don't understand, and neither does he, and he doesn't want to tell anyone because it sounds so crazy. We teleported 20 minutes away. It was the single, most disorienting feeling I've ever experienced. But now after that, I feel like everyone in my life has just changed. Everyone feels so distant. I can't shake the feeling that something is still really very off. Please help. When I was 19, I worked at Walmart in a festival town. I was a cart pusher, and in the summer the store would get overrun with festival goers. On this week, many years ago, there was a hippie music festival going on. The venue was very large, and the population of this small Midwestern town would swell by several thousand people. I remember that I was walking away from the store to gather shopping carts, donned in my blue vest of honor, and there were 2 or 3 young women about my age walking towards the store to enter. They were obviously festival goers, and all donned out in their hippie-esque regalia. I saw this blonde girl from about 20 feet away, and something about her just struck me with a massively intense feeling of familiarity. We began to walk slowly past one another, and we locked eyes and could not stop looking at one another. Then she stopped, pulled away from her friends, walked up to me and said, "I know you. Where do I know you?" I told her I was experiencing the exact same feeling. We stood there for 20 minutes while her friends became impatient and tried to recall past towns we had both lived in, or people who we both might mutually know. But nothing in our histories lined up, like, not whatsoever in the least. She was from a different state entirely. There was no crossover whatsoever. Eventually we gave up and went our separate ways. I was a far less confident and socially awkward man then, and I should have gotten her Facebook or number, but I did not. I'm 34 now, and I still think about her all the time and wonder very deeply about who the hell she was, or how we could have felt so strongly about one another, with no apparent connection. Okay, so I go to the grocery store around 6-ish to pick up food for the week. I use the self-checkout and I'm walking straight towards the automatic doors to leave, and a couple walks in. The girl catches my eye because she has a very detailed tattoo of a dragon on her thigh. I admire the tattoo for a second, just as she slightly stumbles on the floor mat, which causes her glasses to fall off her face and onto the floor. She bends down to pick them up and proceeds past me. I get home, cook my meals, which takes an hour or so. I go into my bathroom and my cat has knocked over my toothbrush, which is now being chewed by my dog. I have no extras, so I hop back into my car to go back to the grocery store for a toothbrush. It is around 8-ish. I grab the toothbrush, but this time I have to go to a regular register because the self-checkout is closed. My route to the doors is different this time. I have to walk down an aisle in front of the registers and the doors are to my right. Just as I'm getting to the door, the exact same couple walk in. The dragon tattoo is a dead giveaway. The girl then stumbles on the floor mat, drops her glasses, and kneels down to pick them up. No expression, nothing. I felt so confused. I got back in my car and just thought of the sheer amount of coincidences that just happened. I see this couple once, the girl drops her glasses and picks them up. My dog just so happens to chew my toothbrush, causing me to come back to the grocery store hours later. Somehow this couple not only needed to come back to the store, but do so at the exact time as me where we met, in the exact place and manner. I just now have a different point of view. Then the cherry on top, the girl stumbles and drops her glasses. Again. Shit was weird.